This conference will now be recorded.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So this is time now for this first session on biosafety cabinets. During the first session, I presented the different types of biosafety cabinets, how they work, and also some other type of cabinets that may or may not protect. During the second session, we saw how to install, especially Class II biosafety cabinet, the best possible way. And we also saw how to have them checked, maintained properly. And during this session now, what we'll do is we'll see how to optimize our work in a biosafety cabinet, how to ensure that what we do is safe and efficient. And so actually, again, I will focus mainly on Class II biosafety cabinets because they are the most sensitive to air moves, for instance. And so I will first start to look at the principles and in relation to those principles, so what are the things that we should do when using a biosafety cabinet, and also the things that we should definitely not do. And then I will throw some bases to be able to draft an SOP on the safe and efficient use of a Class II biosafety cabinet. The last part will be on the safe and efficient use of a Class I biosafety cabinet. And for all cases, I will always look at personal protection, but also look at some aspect of product protection. So the safe and efficient use of a Class II biosafety cabinet. Remember that personal and protection, they rely mainly on the air curtain at the entrance of the biosafety cabinet. And so this is really something that would define whether or not you are protected or the product inside of the cabinet is protected. And another element is the laminar flow that goes down on the cabinet after going on the HEPA filter. If there is some disturbance there, you will also lose some product protection, but also likely to do some personal protection. The last point is the integrity of the HEPA filters. They need to be not to have any hole, and of course the gaskets also need to be perfect. This is not really a matter of use, it's a matter of checking and maintaining the biosafety cabinet. But the sensitivity of the airflows, that's something which is really related to good work practices. Also, these different aspects, they can be checked through recertification, and that was the topic of last time. But recertification is done on a biosafety cabinet that is not being used at that moment. There might be some materials inside, but it is not used. And so actually the only thing that cannot be checked through recertification is the way the operator is using the biosafety cabinet, the way you are using the biosafety cabinet. Just to illustrate that this part here, the air that goes down there and that enters here, that's really what provides you protection. In case there is some disturbance, you might have some air that goes out and some air that goes directly on, so you may lose personal protection or product protection. So since Class II biosafety cabinets are particularly sensitive to air moves inside, outside, and so on, appropriate work practices are really of a crucial importance. It is very important to avoid any disturbance of those airflows. So the golden rule for all the protection is to avoid disturbing the barrier, mainly the barrier at the entrance of the biosafety cabinet. And so for that, we need to avoid disturbing the inward airflow at the level of the front grill. Also, avoid disturbing the laminar flow that goes down inside of the cabinet, because if you disturb that, if you create some unbalance that, there might be some air that escape or enters without any control, and you will lose product protection, but also personal protection. So the first principle is to avoid any air disturbance outside of the biosafety cabinet. So clearly, we should, when we are working in front of a biosafety cabinet, we should limit all the moves we have there during work. That means that we need to prepare in advance all the materials that will be needed for work. And the best practice is to put that material inside of the biosafety cabinet, but sometimes we don't have enough space in the biosafety cabinet. In that case, some of the items that we don't use so frequently can be outside of the cabinet, but very close. And so the best practice there is to have a small table or a trolley next to your biosafety cabinet with all the materials that are needed. And that cannot be stored in the biosafety cabinet. Actually, when you start working at the biosafety cabinet, you should not move from your chair anymore. You should stay there. The second measure there to prevent disturbance outside of the biosafety cabinet is to prevent circulation behind or around the biosafety cabinet during when you're working. And so this, again, stresses the importance of the correct location of the cabinet. It should not be in the middle of the lab. It should not be on a passageway. It should be at the end of the lab so that it is not disturbed. A second working principle is to respect the operating instructions, meaning the instructions from the supplier or from the manufacturer. Actually, the laminar flow and the protective barrier are only established, only work within a very clearly specified range of airflow velocity, the speed of the airflow, and also a range of air moves. If you are not in that range, you will lose protection, either personal protection or product protection. So the first thing to do is to make sure that the biosafety cabinet that we are using has been recertified according to the program. And actually, a class 2 biosafety cabinet should normally not be used if it is not recertified. And I'm very well aware that this is not always possible in Pakistan, because in a number of Pakistani institutions, there are not enough resources to have a very good recertification. But if there is no such recertification, you might be at risk without even knowing it. So it's very important, and that should be a priority for PEPSA to improve the capacity in recertification. Then when starting to work at the biosafety cabinet, you should check the main parameters, like the airflow velocity and so on. Most of the time you have some indication, and you also have a reading of the pressure before and after the HEPA filter and so on. You should check that it is in the specified range. The third point is very important too, and it seems to be basic, but sometimes it's not respected. You should always work with the sash window in its normal operating position. With the modern biosafety cabinets, there is an alarm. If it's not the case, in some older one, there is no alarm. And so you should always make sure that it is in the normal operating position. If it's too open, if it's open above the normal 8, in that case, you are highly likely to be exposed. And then the last measure there is to respect the alarms. Alarms are there for some reason. When there is an alarm, you should stop working with the biosafety cabinet, because it means that it is not fully functional anymore. And so you should have it checked and repaired in that case. There are still some cabinets where it's possible to shut down the alarm. This is a very bad thing to do. If you do that, you will keep working, and you might forget to put it back on after that. So that means that the next people might also be exposed. So we definitely need to respect the alarms. The third principle is to avoid any air disturbance at the level of the front grille. And you see there on the picture, the normal way it should do is on the left of the picture. The air is sucked through the front grille from inside of the lab, and so it does not enter into the cabinet. And the air from the laminar flow inside of the lab, which can be contaminated with your activity, goes also to that grille. If you have an item that obstructs the grille, even not totally, in that case, you will block the air coming in. That means there will be less pressure coming, less pressure coming from the lab. And you will also disturb the air that should be sucked at the level of the grill. And that air will go out immediately in front of you. So in that case, you will contaminate your lab and you might be exposed. So nothing should never be on the front grill. That's very clear. And that's mainly critical for personal protection, even if you will also lose with respect to product protection. Also, to avoid problems like having wire and so on here, we should connect all equipment inside of the cabinet. And that's why during the last session, I insisted that if you need to have some electricity outside or some water, gas, and so on, you should have some opening on the side, some ports on the side, so that you can have them inside without blocking the grill. Also, for long work session, you should use an armrest. Here you have two models. This one is built in. It's linked to the biosafety cabinet. This one is something that you can move, and you can use it when you need it, where you need it. And if you don't have anything which is built in like this, you could always have this kind of product purchase or even made, so that you can rest your arms without blocking the access of the air to the front grill. So at the bottom, 3 pictures showing some bad practices with respect to that aspect of keeping the front grill free. In this case, this is pretty bad. You see that they have some aluminum paper with pipettes. It's right in the front of the operator. That means that the air that goes from his work there will not be sucked there. It will go right under his nose. That person will be exposed. Here, that lady is probably more conscious, more aware about good practices, but she forgot about this, and she's also blocking part of the grill. That could also pose some problems. And the third one, you see the illustration there. You have a number of electrical items and so on, and you see all the wiring there. That also partially blocks the grill. That means that perhaps even if you work there, there will be some air going out, and that you will contaminate your lab and perhaps expose your colleagues, for instance. Still, to avoid disturbance at the level of front grill, you should also keep the rear grill free of any obstruction. It might look a little bit strange, but I modified the graph on the left to see to show you this. Normally, you should have the air which is blown on the work surface through that HEPA filters and goes down, and half of the air is sucked to the front grill, and half of the air is sucked by the rear grill. And that's really what ensures the laminar flow, okay? If you block the rear grill, that means that the air which should be sucked at that level will go to the front. That means that there will be more positive pressure here, and that means that you will lose your protective barrier. So if you block the rear grill, there will be more air going out at the level of the front grill, and you will expose yourself. This is something that we often overlook, but definitely we should never block the rear grill either. Again, a very bad practice. In that case, it does not completely block the grill, but you can realize that some of the air here will not be able to go down and be sucked that way, and will go in front of the operator. So again, that person is likely to be exposed. Other ways to avoid any disturbance at the level of the front grill is to avoid any unnecessary movement of your arms or movement of materials and so on. So that's why we need to put all the materials inside of the biosafety cabinet before starting to work. And all the materials needs, of course, your samples and so on, but also a small waste bin so that you don't always have to go out when you have some waste to get rid of. And also the disinfectant that you will use in routine, like, for instance, your ethanol or any other disinfectant. And anyways, even if you, of course, to handle inside of the biosafety cabinet, you will have to move your hands, but you should always stay calm and use slow and very cautious moves in order not to disturb that barrier, which is really the kind of weakness of that type of biosafety cabinets. The next principle is to avoid any disturbance of the laminar airflow inside of the biosafety cabinet. We already saw that it was a source of disturbance if it's disturbed because we block the rear grill. There are also other ways to disturb this. And one way is, one way to to disturb the laminar flow is to use very large or high equipment inside of the biosafety cabinet. In that case, the laminar flow will not be laminar anymore. You will have disturbance, and you will have some air that is likely to escape. So in that case, you will disturb that barrier at the front of the cabinet. You might be exposed, but you also take the risk of having some cross-contamination because the air will be mixed, and so you might contaminate your clean sample with some dirty or contaminated samples. So what should we do if we need to use a large piece of equipment in the biosafety cabinet? The best possible solution is not to use a class 2 biosafety cabinet, but a class 1. With class 1, there is no laminar flow, and so you won't disturb it, and the protection is much better. It takes the air away from you. So in that case, you will not be exposed. If you're still willing to use a class 2 biosafety cabinet because, for instance, you don't have a class 1, in that case, the best thing to do is to do the recertification with the larger equipment inside. And so you will see what is the level of disturbance. And you will see with a smoke test, for instance, if you disturb the air at the entrance and if you lose your protection. If it is the case, in that case, you should really consider wearing some additional personal protective equipment, like wearing a mask. If you cannot do that checking, in that case, it might be safe anyways to wear a mask when working at the biosafety cabinet. Another thing to do is to avoid having the work surface with too many items, and especially large items. This is an extremely bad example of that. You see that even if this class 2 biosafety cabinet is not being used, it's used to store a number of different items. And you see that first, the front grill is blocked, so that's pretty bad. Also, there are some high pieces of equipment or materials. That means that the airflow will be disturbed. You have turbulent air, so you will lose personal protection. And of course, you cannot imagine that someone could work in a comfortable way, in a safe way, in such a mess. So this is something that you should definitely avoid. First, biosafety cabinet should not be used for storage, and then even when using it, you should avoid anything that looks like this. You should just have the materials you need for your work and nothing more. Also, to avoid disturbance of the laminar flow inside of the biosafety cabinet, a first thing to do is to avoid any source of heat inside of the biosafety cabinet. Why? If you have some heat which is created inside, that the heated air will move up. So it will go in the opposite direction as the laminar flow. That means that you will have a mixing of air and you will lose your laminar flow. Because of that, you will lose the product protection and you will also lose the personal protection because part of that air which is turbulent is likely to escape. So there are a number of alternatives to this. The first one is to use sterile lobes, and these ones are disposable, and they are very cheap. So it's very cheap to purchase that kind. So if for instance you need to inoculate petri dishes, you can use each time you can use a new lobe like this. So that's pretty safe, no source of heat. You could also do it with some wiring that is sterilized by autoclaving, for instance, before being used inside of the biosafety cabinet. So it does not have to be disposable. If you don't have access to this, in that case, you could use some sterilization device with a limited heat production, like this glass bed sterilizer here. It will only sterilize materials when you use it and only for a short time. But still, it will create some disturbance of the airflow, so it's not the best possible practice. Of course, salespeople will tend to sell you this type of sterilizer instead of loops because they will make a lot more money with this type of sterilizer. Please don't reject the idea of using loops like this, disposable or sterilized loops, sterilized, for instance, in the autoclave. So we should avoid having source of heat inside of the biosafety cabinet, but we should definitely never use an open flame in a class 2 biosafety cabinet. This is, in that case, I really say never, and we see that in some labs. For instance, we might use a Bunsen burner. We can use a kind of alcohol lamp just also to sterilize things. It's a very important heat source and very punctual heat source. So that means that you will disturb the airflow, and that will compromise personal and product protection. But there is also a risk of explosion and fire inside of the biosafety cabinet. Why? Just remember that particles are filtrated by HEPA filters. And those HEPA filters, they stop the particles, but they don't stop the molecules. And gases or the vapors of alcohol are molecules. They will go through the HEPA filter. And in a class 2 biosafety cabinet, 70% of the air is recycled. That means that the molecules of gas or the molecules of alcohol vapor will be recycled, and will tend, the concentration inside of the biosafety cabinet will tend to increase with time. That means that at some time you might reach the ignition point and it might just blow in fire or explode. And this has been the cause of a number of accidents in laboratories a bit everywhere in the world. If you look in the internet, you will see pictures like this. I also put there a reference to an article that happened with a student in Iraq. This can be very dangerous situation for the people who are working there. I mean, in this case, the glass window was blown away, so the people could be hurt, and sometimes it can really destroy life. So never a source of flame, a fire inside of a biosafety cabinet. Some other safe working principle, we should prevent exporting contamination outside of the biosafety cabinet. That means that, for instance, we need to have everything inside, and when the materials that are inside have to go out, we need to decontaminate them. That's the reason why it's highly recommended to work with a small and stable waste bag inside of the biosafety cabinet, instead of having to move the hands out and materials outside all the time. At the end, you just decontaminate the outside of the waste bag and you put it in the trash, and that's easy. Also, if you need some vacuum inside of the biosafety cabinet, you should use a trap for this. So look at the picture on the right-hand side. If you want to use a pump to transfer some liquid from this bottle to this flask here, flask A, in that case, you should put a second flask on the line with some liquid and disinfectants, so that if by incident you also suck some liquid, it will be disinfected at that level. And you should also put on that line a filter for the air. So if the air that will be filtrated might contain some infectious particles, and that they will be stopped by the filter there. So if you need vacuum inside of the biosafety cabinet, please use a flask with disinfectant and a filter on the vacuum line. Also, the last principle is to prevent contamination of the inside of the biosafety cabinet. That's not for biosafety, it's for product protection. And that's why we need to use either sterile materials, or we need to decontaminate the materials prior to using them in the biosafety cabinet. And that's also why we need to decontaminate the work surfaces after and also before work. So, Javed, could you please proceed with the summary in Urdu? And after that, I will try to answer some questions, at least if they are directly related to this this first part of the presentation. Javed?
So, मशाल बात आ रही है मेरी?
जी आ रही है, thank you.
Okay, so आज के सेशन में हमने डिस्कस करना है कि किस तरह हम बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट को एक अच्छे तरीके से इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं, और कौन सा काम हमें करना चाहिए और कौन सा काम हमें नहीं करना चाहिए। अब बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट को अगर आप लोग देखें तो सर्टिफिकेशन होती है, जिस वक्त उसको बनाया जाता है तो उसकी सारी चीजें जो है वो चेक की जाती है। सिर्फ एक चीज जो चेक नहीं की जाती, वो आपके काम करने का जो है वो जो अंदाज है वो चेक नहीं किया जा सकता। کیونکہ اس کی وجہ سے اگر آپ کے کام کرنے کا طریقہ غلط ہو تو یہ جتنی بھی اس کی تکنیکی جو چیزیں ہیں وہ اس کا کوئی فائدہ نہیں ہوتا. اس میں سب سے پہلے جو ہے نا وہ آپ لوگ کی ہم نے بات کی تھی ہوا کی، جو بایوسیفٹی کیبنٹ کے میں اندر کی طرف جاری ہوتی ہے. یہاں پہ آپ لوگ یہ فرنٹ گرل سے، تو اگر آپ لوگوں کا کام کرنے کا انداز ٹھیک نہ ہو اور آپ لوگوں نے اس ہوا کو ڈسٹرب کر دیا تو آپ لوگوں کی پروڈکٹ جو اندر پڑا ہوا ہے اور آپ لوگوں کی بایو سیفٹی جو آپ باہر کام کر رہے ہیں دونوں خطرے میں پڑ سکتے ہیں. اور اس کا ایک نیگیٹو ایک امپیکٹ جو ہے نا وہ ایک اثر پڑتا ہے کام کرنے والے پہ. تو گولڈن رول کیا ہے؟ گولڈن رول یہی ہے کہ جو ہوا اندر کی طرف جو آپ کے پروڈکٹ کے اوپر جو ہے نا اوپر کی طرف سے آ رہی ہے ان کو آپ لوگوں نے ڈسٹرب نہیں کرنا، ان کو آپ لوگوں نے چھیڑنا نہیں ہے. ٹھیک ہے، اس کے لیے بہتر یہ ہے کہ جو چیزیں آپ لوگوں کو بایوسیفٹی کیبنٹ میں کام کرنے کے دوران چاہیے وہ آپ لوگ ایڈوانس میں رکھیں تاکہ آپ کو بار بار اٹھنا نہ پڑے. اور اگر آپ لوگوں کو بیک اپ پہ کوئی چیز چاہیے تو ساری چیزیں بایوسیفٹی کیبنٹ میں رکھنے کی بجائے آپ ایک چھوٹی سی ٹرالی لے لیں اور اس کے ساتھ جو ہے نا وہ بیک اپ پہ اپنا سامان جو ہے نا وہ رکھ کے، تاکہ آپ کو بار بار اٹھنے کی ضرورت نہ پڑے اور آپ لوگوں کی ہوا کم سے کم جو ہے نا وہ آپ لوگ اس کو ڈسٹرب کریں. پھر اس کے علاوہ جو ہے کچھ ہدایات ہے جس کا ہم نے جو ہے نا وہ خاص خیال رکھنا ہوگا کہ جو بایوسیفٹی کیبنٹ کی جس سپیڈ سے جو ہے نا وہ جو ایئر کی جو سپیڈ اسے چاہیے وہ تمام کے تمام وہی ہونے چاہیے جو ایک بایوسیفٹی کیبنٹ کی جو کے لیے جو ہے نا وہ مختص کی ہوئی ہوتی ہے. اور ہمیشہ جو ہے آپ لوگ دیکھیں کہ اس کی ری سرٹیفکیشن جو ہے ہوئی ہے یا نہیں ہوئی یا اگر وہ سرٹیفائیڈ ہے یا نہیں ہے. ہمارے پاکستان میں اس کی ری سرٹیفکیشن کے بہت سارے مسئلے ہیں. پھر ایک جو ونڈو سیش آپ لوگوں کے جو شیشہ آپ لوگوں کے سامنے نظر آ رہا ہوتا ہے اس کو آپ لوگوں نے اس پوزیشن پہ رکھنا ہے جس پوزیشن پہ اس کی ہدایات ہے یا اس کو ریکمینڈ کیا گیا ہے. اور الارم کا آپ لوگوں نے خاص خیال رکھنا ہے. اگر کوئی بھی الارم لگ گیا تو اس کا مطلب یہ ہوگا کہ آپ کی بایوسیفٹی کیبنٹ میں کوئی ایک چیز جو ہے وہ کام نہیں کر رہا. پھر جو مین چیز جو ہم بار بار یہ چیز ڈسکس کر رہے ہیں کہ جو آپ لوگوں کا فرنٹ گرل ہے اس کو آپ لوگوں نے فرنٹ گرل آپ لوگوں کا بلاک ہو جائے، آپ لوگوں کی جو اندر والی ہوا ہے وہ آپ لوگوں کی طرف آنی سٹارٹ ہو جائے اور جو باہر سے اندر کی طرف جو ہوا جا رہی ہے وہ اندر کی طرف جو ہے نا وہ ڈائریکٹ باہر سے آپ کے پروڈکٹ کے اوپر جو ہے نا وہ چلنی سٹارٹ ہو جائے. اس کے لیے اگر آپ لوگ لمبے عرصے کے لیے یا لانگ ٹائم کے لیے جو ہے نا اگر آپ لوگ کام بھی کرنا چاہیں تو ایک تو یہ اپنے بازو کو رکھنے کے لیے ایک ان بلٹ بھی جو ہے نا یہ چیز آتی ہے اور آپ لوگوں کا جو ہے ایک اس کو عام کہتے ہیں جس کے اوپر آپ جو ہے نا وہ ایک گھنٹہ بھی اگر آپ لوگ کام کریں تو آپ لوگوں کا بازو فرنٹ گرل پہ نہیں ہوگا، آپ لوگوں کا جو ہے نا وہ بلاک نہیں ہوگا. یہ وہ تمام تصاویر ہے جس کی وجہ سے جو ہے نا ہم نے کوشش کی ہے کہ آپ لوگوں کو بتائے کہ کس طرح ایک بار سے فرنٹ گرل آپ لوگ جو ہے نا وہ بلاک کرتے ہیں اور جو آپ لوگ خطرے میں اسے پڑ سکتے ہیں. اس کی طرح آپ لوگوں کا ڈیول گرل ہے یہ بھی آپ لوگوں کے لیے بہت امپورٹنٹ ہے کیونکہ اگر آپ لوگوں نے اس کو بلاک کر دیا تو اس میں جو ہوا جا رہی ہے وہ فرنٹ گرل کی طرف جو ہے نا وہ آنی سٹارٹ ہو جائے گی جس کی وجہ سے جو ہے وہ اس کے اوپر زیادہ جو ہے نا وہ دباؤ ہوگا اور وہ جو ایکسٹرا ہوا ہے وہ آپ کی طرف آئے گی جس سے آپ جو ہے نا وہ خطرے میں پڑ سکتے ہیں. اور آپ لوگوں کی جتنی بھی ہاتھ ہلانے کے جو انداز ہے اس کو آپ لوگ کوشش کریں کہ آہستہ آہستہ اپنے ہاتھوں کو ہلائے تاکہ جو ہے نا وہ ہوا ہم کم از کم جو ہے نا وہ ڈسٹرب کریں. پھر جو بڑے اکوپمنٹ ہے اس کے لیے ضروری ہے کہ آپ لوگ کلاس 1 بایوسیفٹی کیبنٹ کو استعمال کریں کیونکہ اس میں ہوا باہر سے جو ہے نا وہ اندر جا کے اوپر کی طرف جو ہے نا وہ منہ کر رہی ہوتی ہے، جو بندہ کام کر رہا ہوتا ہے اس کی طرف نہیں آ رہی. تو اگر کوئی ہوا ادھر ادھر تھوڑی بہت ڈسٹرب ہو بھی رہی ہے بڑے اکوپمنٹ کی موجودگی میں تو وہ آپ کی طرف وہ ہوا نہیں آئے گی. ہاں اگر آپ کی مجبوری ہے کہ آپ نے بایوسیفٹی کیبنٹ کو استعمال کرنا ہے تو پھر کوشش کریں کہ وہ جو بڑے اکوپمنٹ ہے ان کو رکھنے کے بعد آپ لوگ اسموک ٹیسٹ سے جو ہے نا وہ اس کی ہوا کی جو ہے نا وہ آمد و رفت کو چیک کریں کہ وہ کہیں ڈسٹرب تو نہیں ہو رہی. اور اس کے علاوہ آپ لوگ پی پی کا بھی جو ہے نا وہ خاص خیال رکھیں. پھر اس کے علاوہ آپ لوگ کوشش کریں کہ بایوسیفٹی کیبنٹ میں میکسیمم چیزیں کو نہ رکھیں، ان کو لوڈ سارا جو ہے نا وہ اس کو ساری چیزوں کو نہ رکھے، غیر ضروری چیزیں اور یہ وہ ساری، کیونکہ اس سے آپ لوگوں کے کام کرنے کا جو انداز ہے جو آپ لوگ کام کر رہے ہیں وہ سارا کچھ جو ہے نا وہ آپ لوگ آسانی سے کام نہیں کر سکیں گے اور آپ لوگ کی ساری ہوا جو ہے نا وہ ڈسٹرب ہو جائے گی. پھر फ्लेम की बात कर रहे हैं, हमेशा जो है ना ये जो फ्लेम स्पिरिट लैंप वगैरह जो है ये कभी भी आप लोग जो है कम से कम क्लास 2 बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट में तो कभी भी यूज ना करें। उससे होता ये है कि वही हवा डिस्टर्ब हो जाती है, जो कि जो है ना वो उसकी वेलोसिटी और वो सारी चीजें डिस्टर्ब हो जाती है। बेहतर ये अगर आप क्लास 2 बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट में काम कर रहे हैं तो ये जो डिस्पोजेबल अगर हाँ फिर भी आपके पास कोई इसकी अवेलेबिलिटी का इशू है तो ये ग्लास बीड की शक्ल में इस तरह का जो है ना वो इक्विपमेंट आता है, जो जब भी आप वायर लूप होता है उसको करके तो ये थोड़ी सी जो है ना वो हीट हो जाता है, जो आप लोगों का स्पिरिट लैंप वाला काम कर रहा है, लेकिन उससे जो है ना वो कम से कम आप लोगों की जो आग लगने का जो खतरा है स्पिरिट लैंप से, उससे जो है ना बच जाएंगे। कोशिश करें आपकी कोई कंटेमिनेशन बाहर ना जाए। अगर फॉर एग्जांपल आप लोगों ने कोई सेल कल्चर वगैरह के दौरान अगर आप लोगों ने कोई भी है तो कोशिश करें आप लोग मिसाल आप लोग मीडिया को जो है ना वो निकाल रहे हैं, आप लोग उस पर डिसइंफेक्ट और ये आप लोगों को फिल्टर है जो सिरिंज फिल्टर की तरह होता है, ताकि कोई भी आप लोगों की यहाँ पे जो जरासीम वगैरह है वो आप लोगों की बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट के बाहर ना जाए। और जो मटेरियल अगर आप लोग रखना चाहें तो वो भी कोशिश करें कि आप लोग स्प्रे वगैरह करके और सरफेस को सारा साफ साफ करके, ताकि कोई चीज बाहर भी कंटेमिनेशन ना जाए और कोई भी कंटेमिनेशन बाहर से भी अंदर की तरफ ना जाए। शुक्रिया। यस फिलिप।
Yes, thank you very much, Javed. Wait. Okay. So there is just one question. It's about the efficacy of the Gladbits sterilizer. I see that Furkan answered the question. So anyways, yeah, it has some efficiency, but mostly on fine items like loops, for instance, which are already clean. If it's not dirty, it's efficient. And most of the time they operate between 100 and up to 300 degrees, and 10 seconds is enough. If you don't want to disturb the air, it's probably better to work at a lower temperature for a bit long time. But again, it's not the ideal situation because it's still putting some source of heat inside of the biosafety cabinet. But we need a way to sterilize. So if you cannot do otherwise, it's something that you can use. So in the second part, I will present you the basis for an SOP, a standard operating procedure. Actually, an SOP is what is needed for operators to know exactly what to do, in what order, and so on, in order to, in this case, use a Class 2 biosafety cabinets. And so if you look on the internet, you will find a number of SOPs to use biosafety cabinets, mainly from American universities. I don't think it's a good idea to copy paste such SOPs. The SOP has to be very precise and specific and really adapted to your activities and also to your biosafety cabinet. And so you can certainly be inspired. You can use them as a basis, but please don't copy paste them and adapt them really to your activities. So usually those SOPs have three parts. The first one is on the preparation of the work session. The second one is on conducting the work session. And the third one is on the ending the work session. So the first thing to do is to turn on the biosafety cabinet at least 5 minutes before handling, and some procedures will say 15 minutes. And that's even before you start putting things inside, because actually when the biosafety cabinet is working, you are cleaning the air progressively. So it's good to do it from the start. Then you should make sure that you will work in comfortable position. That means you should adjust your chair, the armrest, and so on. You should check the monitoring devices, alarms, and so on to see if everything is correct. And of course, put on the protection that you need, basically gloves, but you should be protected according to the risk and the procedures in place. Then you should decontaminate the work surfaces. That's mainly for product protection because it's before working. and prepare all the needed materials, including disinfectant inside of the biosafety cabinet, including also the small waste bin that you should put inside. Again, everything that you introduce into the biosafety cabinet, you should decontaminate it, and that's for product protection again. Then that's quite an important point. You should organize work in a logical, ergonomic way, so that you don't have like things that cross each other. If you are right-handed, for instance, you could have the starting materials on the left, you handle things in the middle, and you have your end products on the right side. Also, the waste bin should be at the end of the biosafety cabinet, close to the handling part, and close to the rear grill, but not obstructing it. And then, when you have put everything inside of the biosafety cabinet, then you still wait 5 more minutes before starting to handle. Why? Again, so that the air is cleaned up during that time, and also so that when you start working, the laminar flow is again laminar. When conducting the work session, you also need to take a number of precautions. You should always use gloves that are protective. That means that if they are damaged during the course of work and so on, or overtly contaminated, you should change them. You should always work in a calm way without stress or rushing. Having a work session in a biosafety cabinet is not something that we do in 15 minutes between 2 meetings. We need to be sure that we have enough time to do things properly. So it has to be planned, and you should plan for enough time. Then we should move arms slowly, without any brusque gesture, without any rushing or anything. Very important, we need to always be careful not to block the front and the rear grills. The front grills, it's quite obvious, but the rear grill is also very important. In particular, we should not rest the forearms on the front grill, and if we work for a long work session, and we tend to do that, we should really look for some type of armrest. All contaminated waste inside of the cabinet should be put in that small waste bag or container. Also, in case of spill, I mean, biosafety cabinets are there to protect us from aerosols during normal operation, but also in case of spill. So if there is a spill, the first thing to do is to keep the biosafety cabinet working. It should keep working. It's there to protect you in that case. And then stay calm and close your open tubes and start cleaning your cleaning procedure. It's also the case in case if there is an electric breakdown, or if in case the fan would stop, or in case there would be an alarm. In that case, the biosafety cabinet might not be working anymore, especially if there is an electrical breakdown and no emergency electricity. You should stay calm, close open containers, and close the work session. In that case, you stop the work session. You might resume it later, but you should stop it, because in that case, you will not be protected. The third part of such an SOP should be about closing the work session. First, you should do all that with your biosafety cabinet still working, because it will keep protecting you during that time. When working, we should close all the containers that contain biological agents, biological materials, including the waste bin, for instance. We should decontaminate everything that goes out, including, again, that waste bag or container, and move out of the biosafety cabinet. Contaminated waste inside of that small waste bag or so, they should put into a larger waste bag or a container outside of the biosafety cabinet. Then you should also decontaminate all work surfaces, and that's important for the people who work after you. It's for biosafety, but also for product protection. We should also think of decontaminating the kind of retention and the holding basin that is under the work surface, and this is something which is very often forgotten. We need to do that. We need to do that on a routine basis, like once a week or once every 2 weeks, but also if you have a spill. If you have a spill, it's likely that there is some liquid that will go under the work surface and end up there. You should finally remove and eliminate gloves also as contaminated waste. And then you should still let the biosafety cabinet on working for at least 5 minutes. Why? In order to keep cleaning the air, cleaning the air flows during that time. And so those are all protection that both ensure personal protection, the protection of your lab from contamination, and also product protection. I just mentioned this video. I will not show it. It's a little bit long, but there are a number of videos about working safely in a Class II biosafety cabinet on the web. This one I think is very well done. So I would recommend that if you have some time to have a look at it. No, the last part is about using a Class I biosafety cabinet first in a safe manner, but also in an efficient way with respect to product protection as much as we can. This part will be much lower. Why? Because a Class I biosafety cabinet is much more robust than a Class II. It's much less sensitive to air moves. So, for instance, it will not be sensitive to the air movements at the entrance, or at least much less, because all the air is sucked to the end of the cabinet and to the top of the cabinet. There is no laminar flow that offers product protection, so you don't have to worry about that. And there is really no front grill. And if even there is a front grill, it's not important for protection. So because of that, it's much more robust, and handling in a Class I biosafety cabinet, it's much simpler. Basically, you can work inside of the Class I biosafety cabinet as if you were working on a bench. So the biosafety precautions to work in a Class I biosafety cabinet, you should also respect the operating instructions and conditions. It's like in a Class II biosafety cabinet, but much simpler. If you look at the instruction to use a Class I biosafety cabinet by the manufacturer, it will be definitely much shorter. Another thing that you should do is also locate the most hazardous materials further inside at the back of the biosafety cabinet, a little bit like in a Class II. Also, and that's we need to avoid anything that could create that would export contamination from the biosafety cabinet. So that measures like using a small waste bag inside of the biosafety cabinet is also applicable here. Decontaminating all exiting material also applicable. And if vacuum is needed to insert a trap, as shown for the Class II biosafety cabinet, is also something that applies. So all those rules are for both types of cabinets. And of course, you should decontaminate work surface after the work session. As said during the first session, Class I biosafety cabinet is not a Class I biosafety cabinet is not designed for product protection. It's only designed for personal protection. But that does not mean that it does not offer any product protection, and that you cannot work in a way that guarantees at least some level of product protection. And that can actually be achieved in using standard good microbiological techniques, as we would do for bench work. We can work more or less the same way inside of the Class I biosafety cabinet, and we'll have the same level of product protection, perhaps even better, but with a much better level of personal protection. So what should be done when we use a Class I biosafety cabinet besides the precautions I told you about before? We should use the standard good microbiology techniques, and those that normally apply for bench work, for instance, to inseminate petri dishes and so on. And you see that for a Class I, there is no contraindication to use a flame inside of a biosafety cabinet. So you can use a kind of burner, alcohol burner like here, without any problem. Why? Because first, you will not disturb the laminar airflow, because there is no laminar airflow. The air movement goes from the entrance to the top of the cabinet, and it will be exactly the same with the heated air. Also, the alcohol vapors will be evacuated from the biosafety cabinet. There is no recirculation and no buildup of concentration of those vapors. The only thing you need to be careful is that you use a small flame, like illustrated there. It should not, the flame should not be too high so that it does not damage a HEPA filter. That's the only condition. But it's quite safe and easy to use with a small flame like this. Some additional precaution to guarantee to offer some good level of product protection is also to segregate materials from clean to contaminated, exactly as I explained for the Class II Biosafety Cabinet. So in order to avoid materials that cross each other inside of the Biosafety Cabinet. Also, and that's specific for inoculating petri dishes. When working on the bench, many people inoculate petri dishes when looking at the petri dish, and so putting it a little bit aside and then doing the inoculation. If you do that in a Class 1 biosafety cabinet, you should really keep your petri dishes horizontal so that they are not exposed to the air which is sucked by the fan of the cabinet. And in doing that, normally you should not have any contamination. So from that point of view, it's basic precautions with a few improvements, like keeping the petri dishes horizontal all the time. So Javed, if you could also present this part in Urdu, please.
सेकंड सेशन में हम डिस्कस करेंगे कि किस तरह जो है ना हम बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट में काम करते हैं। तो काम करने का जो तरीका है उसको जो है 3 हिस्सों में तकसीम किया है, तैयारी का मरहला, काम करने का मरहला और फिर इख्तितामी मरहला। अगर हम काम करने के लिए तो हमेशा को आन के बाद 5 मिनट के लिए उसको ऑन रहने दे, अपनी चेयर वगैरह सब अपनी इसी हिसाब से रख के कि आप लोग जो है ना आसानी से काम करें। जितनी भी आप लोगों की अलार्म और ये सारी चीजें उसको चेक करें, ग्लव्स लगाएं, सरफेस को डिकंटेमिनेट करें, जितनी भी आप लोगों की मटेरियल जो आप लोग को चाहिए वो आप लोग इकट्ठे करें और जो मटेरियल आपको चाहिए उसको आप लोग बाकायदा डिसइंफेक्ट करें। और अपनी बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट को जो है वो जिस तरह हम कहते हैं 3 हिस्सों में तकसीम करें, क्लीन एरिया, वर्किंग एरिया, डर्टी एरिया के क्लीन में आप लोग जो है वो हिसाब जो है ना आप लोग इस तरह मैनेज करें कि आप लोगों की क्लीन चीजें किसी डर्टी एरिया में ना आए। और फिर उसके बाद कुछ काम करने से पहले भी आप लोग कुछ वक्त के लिए उसको जो है ना वो हवा को जो है ना वो रहने दे कंटिन्यू, ताकि वो अपनी मुनासिब स्पीड पे आ जाए। फिर उसके करने का आप लोग ग्लव्स होने चाहिए, हाथों को को बिल्कुल आप लोग जो है ना वो बंद ना करें। और जो भी वेस्ट जो है ना वो जनरेट होता है उसके लिए आप लोग वेस्ट बैग रखें। कभी भी कोई स्पिल वगैरह हो पुरसुकून रहे, कोई मसला नहीं है, उसमें जो है ना वो बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट आपको जो है ना वो हिफाजत के साथ रखेगा। और अगर कोई उसके बाद अगर कोई ज्यादा कोई बिजली चली गई या कोई ज्यादा कोई फैन ने काम करना बंद कर दिया तो उस वक्त भी आप लोग पुरसुकून रहे, सिर्फ जो आप लोगों के कंटेनर जो सैंपल वगैरह उसको बंद करें और अपने काम को जो है ना वो स्टॉप करें। फिर उसके बाद जिस वक्त आप लोगों का काम आप लोगों का खत्म हो जाता है तो अगेन जितनी भी आप लोगों की बायोलॉजिकल जो स्पेसिमेन वगैरह है उनको बंद करें। जितनी भी आप लोग जो चीजें निकाल रहे हैं उसको डिकंटेमिनेट करके निकाल दें, चाहे वो वेस्ट हो या आप लोगों की बाकी मटेरियल हो। और इसके अलावा सरफेस को डिकंटेमिनेट करें और जिस सरफेस के ऊपर आप लोग काम कर रहे हैं उसको भी कोशिश करें हफ्ते में जो है ना वो एक बार ऊपर करके अंदर से भी जो है ना वो साफ करें। और बंद कर काम करने के बाद जब सारी चीजें ग्लव्स आप लोग रिमूव करें उसको वेस्ट में, तो अगेन बंद करने से पहले, स्विच ऑफ करने से पहले 5 मिनट तक उनको रहने दे और उसके बाद स्विच ऑफ कर दे। और उसके लिए बेहतरीन वीडियो जो फिलिप जो है ना वो रिकमेंड कर रहे हैं और उस पे जो है ना वो 100% श्योर है कि ये सारे प्रैक्टिसेस इसमें बहुत वेल प्रेजेंटेड है, तो ये इस लिंक से आप लोग उसको जो है ना वो जा सकते हैं। अब आते हैं क्लास 1 बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट। जिस तरह हमें पता है कि वो आप लोगों की इन्वायरमेंट और आपके पर्सनल प्रोटेक्शन तो करता है लेकिन आप लोगों की प्रोडक्ट प्रोटेक्शन नहीं करता। उसकी मेन सेफ्टी कैबिनेट क्लास 2 में जिस तरह एयर का मसला है कि उसके फ्रंट ग्रिल और रियर ग्रिल में वो बड़ा सेंसिटिव है, क्लास 1 में क्योंकि ये है नहीं तो एयर की सेंसिटिविटी का ऐसी कोई इशू नहीं है। सिर्फ वही गुड प्रैक्टिसेस आप लोग फॉलो करें जो आप लोग क्लास 2 बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट में फॉलो कर रहे थे। अब बात आती है प्रोडक्ट प्रोटेक्शन के लिए, तो गुड माइक्रोबायोलॉजिकल प्रैक्टिसेस को फॉलो करके इसको जिस तरह आप लोग बेंच पे काम कर रहे हो, बेंच समझ के इस पे अपनी गुड माइक्रोबायोलॉजी जो आप लोग की जो प्रैक्टिसेस है उसको फॉलो करके और आप लोग जो है काम करें। अब उसमें जिस तरह क्लास 2 बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट में जो है ना वो जो स्पिरिट लैम्प है वो बिल्कुल अलाउड नहीं है। यहाँ पे आप लोगों के पास ये ऑप्शन है कि अपनी प्रोडक्ट की प्रोटेक्शन के लिए आप लोग स्पिरिट लैम्प को ऑन कर सकते हैं, सिर्फ उसमें एक एहतियात रख के कि वो ज्यादा ऊंचा ना हो, ज्यादा बड़ा ना हो, क्योंकि ऊपर जो है ना वो फिल्टर लगा है कि कहीं फिल्टर जो है ना वो उससे जल ना जाए। अब उसमें जो है एक चीज प्रोडक्ट की प्रोटेक्शन के लिए हम ये भी करेंगे कि जितनी भी आप लोगों की क्लीन चीजें हैं उसको सेपरेट रखें, ताकि आप लोगों का जो प्रोडक्ट वगैरह है वो सारी चीजें कंटेमिनेट आपस में ना हो। दूसरा, आप लोग पेट्री डिश को अगर उसके ऊपर कोई कॉलोनी वगैरह है तो वो जो भी आप लोग कॉलोनी उससे उठाएंगे, प्लेट को आप लोगों ने हॉरिजॉन्टल फॉर्म में रखना है, उसको कभी भी उठा के वर्टिकल फॉर्म में नहीं लाना, क्योंकि हवा जो बाहर की तरफ से आपकी बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट क्लास 1 में आ रही है तो वो ऊपर जाके आपकी बायोसेफ्टी कैबिनेट क्लास 1 में ही गुजर के तो ऊपर की तरफ जा रही है। तो जो बाहर से हवा आ रही है वो आपके प्रोडक्ट की और उन चीजों को कंटेमिनेट कर सकता है। लेकिन अगर आप लोग अपने पेट्री डिश को हॉरिजॉन्टल फॉर्म में रखें तो आप लोगों की हवा के साथ जो अंदर की तरफ आ रही है, जो सरफेस है आप लोगों की पेट्री डिश का, उसके साथ उसकी क्रॉसिंग नहीं होगी, जिसकी वजह से आप लोगों की मजीद आप लोगों का प्रोडक्ट जो है ना वो प्रोटेक्ट रह सकता है। थैंक यू सो मच। यस फिलिप।
Thank you very much, Javed. So we have some time for questions, but this time there are less questions than the time before. There is one question, one additional question about class 1 versus class 2 biosafety cabinets. Actually, there was an answer there. Actually, most generally, and that's also in Western labs, we have many more class 2 biosafety cabinets because they are also made for sample protection, for product protection. So that's really the case. But still, I think that traditionally people always think only class 2 biosafety cabinet, and they don't think that a class 1 could provide some good services. And that's something that we should probably change, because there are also a number of advantages of using a class 1 cabinet with respect to facility of use, with respect to maintenance, recertification, and so on. So this is why I'm not neutral here, but I really want to stimulate the fact that we think, oh, okay, what do we know? Class 1, class 2. The salesperson, they will always recommend class 2. It's much easier for them, and also it's more expensive. They will have a better commission on that, and so on and so on. And they may not be aware of you or your needs. So, but you're in your position. If you need to purchase some equipment, I think it's a good thing to at least think about possibly using a class 1. And looking at the different elements that I mentioned during session 1, you might end up saying, in this case, I would prefer a class 1. For your information, in a number of labs I'm working with here in Europe, we have in BSL2 or even BSL3 labs, we have class 2 biosafety cabinet and class 1 biosafety cabinet next to each other. And the most hazardous operations are done in the class 1. Or, for instance, if you need to have a small bioreactor inside of the biosafety cabinet, it's also done in a class 1. So it's not just something that could be useful in Pakistan. In our countries, we use class 1 biosafety cabinets, even in BSL3 labs, for instance. So this is not really the topic of today, but we had a few more time to answer this question. And also there were questions about that during last session. So now I think we'll, oh, what is this? Wait. Yeah, so we still have one session. It will be next Thursday. And during that session, actually, we collected all the questions you asked during the different session, and so we'll spend the time during that session to answer all those questions. And also, if you have some additional questions, please feel free to send them to PEPSA, and we'll also try to answer those questions. So that will be the closure of this webinar. I think it's good to have all your possible questions about this topic to be answered before we close it totally. So I hope that you will also be there for those conclusions. And thank you very much for your participation to this session. Thank you also to Javed for his support and to the PEPSA team. Any more comment from anyone?